beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings. Welcome back. And as always, thank you all so much for joining me today. You know, there's a great piece in Consortium News by Ray McGovern, Trump-Ukraine Plan AOA, alive on arrival. Yuri Ushavkov, Putin's man on Ukraine, said there's no firm plan for Ukraine yet, and some American ideas are acceptable to Russia, some not, but the plan is not dead. Why is the West's narrative so different? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each program, my guests and I connect the dots between current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events occur. Let's take a quick look at a couple of today's headlines. The Justice Department kills longtime tool used to prove racial discrimination. The decades-old provision of civil rights law allows statistical disparities to be used as proof of racial discrimination. After years of conservative complaints, the Justice Department moved yesterday to kill a decades-old provision of civil rights law that allows statistical disparities to be used as proof of racial discrimination. The new regulations reinterpret a key plank of the Civil Rights Act, which were used without an opportunity for public comment, interestingly enough, which is unusual for major regulatory action. The rules are final and will take effect today. While they apply only to Justice Department programs, the administration has made clear that it plans similar regulatory rollbacks across the government. Conservatives have long argued that proving discrimination should require proof that someone intended to treat people differently. And they say that when people are being judged by data, they feel pressure to make decisions based on racial quotas. In that way, the Trump administration argues, a policy meant to fight discrimination is actually fostering it. That makes no sense. But anyway, I guess the adage is, please don't confuse me with the facts. And folks, understand there is de jure discrimination, as in discrimination by law, and there is also what is known as de facto discrimination, which is discrimination of fact, as you use data to prove de facto. Anyway, House panel plans to end its boat strike probe, the Republican chair says. Lawmakers in the House and Senate have been scrutinizing the U.S. military's killing of two alleged drug smugglers who survived an attack on their boat. Tuesday, they said yesterday that they're planning to end the inquiry into the U.S. military strike that killed these two survivors. Here's some audio from the president from the recent Politico interview.
trafficking
Yeah, I
into
would.
the U.S.?
Sure, I would.
You pardoned former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez and let him out of prison, even though he was convicted in a massive international drug trafficking scheme. How is that zero tolerance on drug trafficking?
Well, I don't know him, and I know very little about him, other than people said it was like a Obama-Biden type setup, where he was set up. He was the president of the country. The country deals in drugs like probably you could say that about every country. And because he was the president, they gave him like 45 years in prison. And there are many people fighting for Honduras, very good people that I know, and they think he was treated horribly, and they asked me to do it, and I said, I'll do it.
Do you think that could send the wrong message to
No,
drug
I don't
dealers?
think so. Look, I think, when you weaponize government, they've weaponized their government just like they did over here. I'm one of the people that survived, but they weaponized the government. We had the most weaponized government. Our election was rigged. They went out.
When you weaponize government as though he's not doing that. And in terms of the president of Honduras, I don't know him. But some people told me he was a good guy. So what the hell? I'm going to let him out of prison, even though he was convicted in an American court. Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, told reporters yesterday he had received all the information he needed after launching the probe less than 2 weeks ago. A spokesperson for Rogers confirmed the congressman's plans, and this casts doubt on what has been perhaps the most muscular oversight effort from Congress during Hegseth's tenure. And finally, at the first stop on his affordability tour, the president mocks affordability. What was supposed to be a speaking tour to connect with Americans struggling with higher prices and stagnant wages was instead a kind of greatest hits campaign speech. The president had charts that he read from touting economic data that he probably didn't really understand. The stage around him was filled with signs reading lower prices, bigger paychecks. Well, I'd love to get a bigger paycheck and pay less. Don't think that's on the horizon. He mocked the word affordability and touted how high the stock market had risen and said Americans didn't need so many pencils. What's important to understand is, as he talks about looking at your 401k, the stock market and stocks, that's not the economy. That's the financialized economy. That's not the real economy. When you go to the grocery store and you pay more for eggs and milk and cheese and bread and hot dogs and bologna, when you pay more for that, that's the real economy, not check your 401k. And if that's doing well, then all must be right with the world. With that being said, the issue before us today, despite widespread rejection and ridicule in Western media of Donald Trump's peace proposal on Ukraine being, quote, dead on arrival, end quote, in Moscow, there was Trump's envoy and his son-in-law discussing the quote unquote dead document for 5 hours until midnight on Tuesday with Russian President Putin at the Kremlin. What does all of this mean? Let's talk to my guest. He leads the Speaking Truth to Power section of Tell the Word, a publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in inner city Washington. He served as a CIA analyst for 27 years for the administrations of John Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush. His duties included chairing the National Intelligence Estimates and preparing the President's Daily Brief, which he briefed one-on-one to President Reagan's 5 most senior national security advisors from 1981 to 1985. In January of 2003, he co-created VIPS, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, to expose how intelligence was being falsified to, quote unquote, justify the war in Iraq. Ray McGovern. As always, Ray, welcome back.
Thanks very much. It seems like a long time ago that we started this little dialogue. I'm happy to continue it.
As am I, Ray, and I'm always grateful when you're able to put me on the calendar. So Ray, you write, Yuri Ushakov, Putin's chief aide on Ukraine in the official readout, said the two sides discussed several options, including territorial issues, and agreed to continue contacts. Quote, we did not discuss specific formulations, specific American proposals, but discussed the very essence of what is embedded in these American documents. I cannot disclose the key points of these documents, Ushakov said. They all relate to a long-term peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis. He said there's no firm plan for Ukraine yet, and that some American ideas are acceptable to Russia, some not, but the plan is not dead. Ray, why is there such a negative spin on this by the Western press?
Well, as I say it, there are two reasons. One is political. They don't want to give Putin or the Russians any credit, or Trump any credit. The other is a kind of what I call the Trump derangement syndrome, or what it has evolved into. And that is that Trump is, after all, somebody who is enabling, arming, justifying, supporting genocide, forced starvation. Kind of hard to dissect that kind of aberrant behavior from something good that he might be doing. Good, give me a break. Nobody can conceive of anything that Trump might be doing that for whatever reason might have good effects. Now, it's really hard for American people to kind of break this into a discerning match and say, look, can he do anything good at all? And the answer I give, which is sort of an outlier answer, yeah, he can. And my God, if he really wants to end the war, stop the killing, if a new element of realism has been introduced where he's no longer listening to people who tell him that the Russians are running out of weapons, that the Russians have no indigenous capability to produce weapons, that Russia has lost, that the battlefield is still very much in doubt, but the Ukrainians can still win. He'd been told that, okay? And now, finally, a couple months ago, he said, that's hogwash. And he appointed two trusted advisors. One is his son-in-law, but the other is a fellow that has now met Putin 6 times, count them, Witkoff. And they came up with a bunch of together, like Witkoff and Kushner and Russian representatives like Dmitriev, who met in Miami, went over this stuff. These are discussion points, yeah? And they even compared it with Umerov from the Ukraine. So these were talking points. They were not to be dismissed as dead on arrival. And as Ushakov, you mentioned before, has stressed, this is a good sign. Things are starting to mesh. And I guess the big thing is that, it was on his way to vacation in Florida for Thanksgiving. It's one of those things where Trump is up against the bulwark of the plane, and you can hardly hear him. But somebody says, "Well, what about the territory? The territory that the Russians are going to seize more territory?" And Trump says, "Well, and this is a quote: it's up to the Russians. They have shown that they're in control here. It's altogether likely that they will seize these lands no matter what. And so do you want 50,000, 60,000 more people dead by trying to protect or retrieve those lands? Well, they're negotiating. Let's see what happens. Now, to me, it makes pretty good sense. And so it's really hard for people to twist their minds around and say, well, could the devil himself, as many people see Trump, be capable of doing something that would save an awful lot of lives and put some order into the situation in Europe? I think he's trying to do that. Whether it's right to say give him credit for that, or just say, well, even a broken clock could be right. What, 2 times, 3 times? How many times is it? 2 times, right? Okay, so for Pete's sake, don't reject this stuff before even the Russians have. That's my point here, and a lot of my colleagues can't go along with that, and they kind of poo-poo these things even right at the start. That's why many of them said, "Oh, it's just dead on arrival." These are very serious people. Dead on arrival. Well, it's not dead on arrival. It's very much live, and there's hope here. Where hope did not exist as long as Trump was listening to people like Kellogg, and we think Rubio, and maybe Hegseth telling him, we can still win this one. We may have to nuke the Russians, but we can still win. Forget about it. It's on the right track now. We got to give him a little bit of credit for doing the right thing on this one.
I'm going to play some video in just a second from the president and his political interview. But before we get there, I wanted to, ask you, there are two of a number of dominant narratives in this whole Western so-called analysis. And one of them is, well, you can't concede territory to Russia. But I don't know how much of this is concession versus this is a war. And when there's war, people have a tendency to take land. And when the war ends, the one that won it keeps to the victor go the spoils. That's the first point. And the second point is, you keep hearing this discussion that, Putin keeps moving the goalposts and Putin is changing his all I've heard from Russia for the last 3 years has been the same demands verbatim. I haven't really seen or heard much variation or deviation from the president or any of his spokespeople. They've had the same demands, and the cornerstone of which is, at the end of the day, we've got to address the fundamental issues that have caused the conflict. And if we don't do that, we don't have anything. Ray McGovern.
Well, that's true. I could tell that you must be a political scientist.
I've hung out with a few.
Yeah. Let's start with the notion that Russia's attack on Ukraine in February 2022 was unprovoked, full-scale, and illegal. Well, I hope that people watching your show know enough to know that it was not unprovoked. It was provoked up the kazoo, as you would say, okay? Full-scale, 90,000 troops threatening Kiev. Their purpose was to scare Zelensky into agreeing to a ceasefire and recognizing that they shouldn't become part of NATO, and he did. In April, like 6 weeks after the war started. He did, okay? And what happened? The Russians agreed, the Ukrainians agreed, the US and the UK came in and said, no, Zelensky, we're gonna reject support for you if you agree to a ceasefire or if you agree not to join NATO, and we'll support you for as long as it takes, okay? Now, how about the illegal? Well, I'm not a lawyer, but Richard Falk is. And he wrote the book, right, that all of my colleague lawyers studied in law school. And he tells me that there's a very good case. It's unsettled law. When you cite Article 51 of the UN Charter, there's a reasonable argument that Putin is right in saying this was not illegal. Forget the legal stuff. We can't resolve that.
Right.
Unprovoked, that I can prove. Now, I see that these things are coming up again now that it looks like Trump is acting a little bit more sensibly. And so actually, I put together the slides that I used a year ago for a speech at the University of Southern California. And they show that first and foremost, that the invasion of Ukraine was provoked. And, I show all the details and how it worked out ever since the promise not to expand NATO way back in February of 1990, for God's sake. But then I finish up with a slide that shows John Mearsheimer. John Mearsheimer is a political scientist. He's an international relations guy, okay? He's been proven right on so many things because he heads the realistic school of international relations. Now, I labored in that school for 27 years as an analyst of Soviet foreign policy at the CIA, but it never occurred to me that this was the realist school of German. I'm happy to be part of it because 11 years ago, after the coup in Kiev, Mearsheimer wrote a piece for Foreign Affairs, the august, much respect, okay? And he said, look, this crisis is the fault of the West. And if the West, and this is a virtual quote, if the West keeps trying to get Ukraine in NATO, this will succeed in destroying Ukraine because the Russians will not allow it. Okay. Whoa. Now, what did he say when I quizzed him on this two years ago at a public meeting? I said, now, John Mearsheimer, people say that this was unprovoked. Do you think that was unprovoked? Did Putin have any other choice? And Mearsheimer says, no. Like I said 9 years ago at that point, this was bound to happen, that it was provoked. And the proof is in the fact that Putin did everything he could to enforce the Minsk Accords, which were supposed to be guaranteed by the French and the British, and which were used just to allow a ceasefire, sort of, to let the Ukrainian forces be built up to a more formidable state under NATO training and equipping. So, in other words, John said, look, he did everything he possibly could to go along with the Minsk Accords. The Ukrainians and their Western backers tricked him on that, betrayed him. So he did everything he could to avoid having to do, in the final analysis, the invasion of Ukraine. Does he want land? Land is sort of kind of a byproduct here. What he wants is to demilitarize, that is to destroy the Ukrainian army if they won't surrender. And then he wants to get the Nazis out of Kiev. The latter is harder. The first is almost achieved because the Russians have gone into and succeeded in most of the Ukrainian army is now destroyed. So what's going to happen? Well, Trump looks at all this. Finally, somebody gets to him and tells him which end is up. And he says, well, hey, this is Biden's war. Why more killing? Let's see if we can work this out with the Russians. Oh, are you going to include the Ukrainians? Well, there's this old adage, no deal about Ukraine without Ukraine. Well, that's led to nothing over the last 10 years. So, to his credit, Trump says, the Ukrainians are not going to agree to this. The West Europeans are feckless. They're just flies in the ointment. Let's deal. And so I have hope that within the next couple of months, there will be some sort of a deal forced on this area of the world by the Russians and the U.S. and the Russians, because the Russians dearly need, as you said in the beginning, a comprehensive new architecture in Europe to prevent this from happening again. And they have the political and now the military strength to do that.
And in terms of no deal about Ukraine without Ukraine, Marco Rubio was right. Ukraine is the proxy here. So I don't think that you can really have substantive analysis in terms of the negotiations and the outcome unless you understand that Rubio on this point was absolutely right, that Ukraine is the proxy. Liam here says, oh, okay, so I guess if Mexico invaded the U.S., took back their territories and won the war, you'd be okay with that. Well, there are a couple of things here, Liam. One is you've got your history a little wrong. Look at it this way. If Canada used the United States as its proxy to fight Mexico, and during the conflict, Mexico was able to seize California, my home state, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and won the war. Whether I'm okay with it or not is irrelevant. It is what it is, as they said in what film was that? It's what it is. It'll come to me in a second. It's what it is, and what are you going to do with that? That's the point here. So anyway, let's hear this brief video from the president.
It's been going back and forth between Putin and Zelensky with various drafts of a peace deal. Which country right now is in the stronger negotiating position?
Well, there can be no question about it. It's Russia. It's a much bigger country. It's a war that should have never happened. Frankly, it wouldn't have happened if I were president, and it didn't happen for 4 years. I watched that taking place, and I said, wow, they're going to cause some problems here. And it started, and it could have evolved into World War III, frankly. I think it's probably not going to be happening now. I think if I weren't president, you could have had World War III. I think you would.
You know, as you made reference to earlier, a broken clock can be right twice a day. On that line, in that snippet, Donald Trump is absolutely right. And we I believe, had the vice president won instead of Trump, we may very well have been in World War III. Your thoughts?
You mean J.D. Vance?
No. Kamala Harris. Had Kamala Harris won, because she was going to continue Biden's policies, which would have been increasingly more aggressive, we may very well have wound up in World War III.
Well, if you look at the end of the Biden administration, where whether it was he himself, not quite altogether mentally, or his advisors, Blinken and Sullivan, with their auto pen, I mean, I was afraid they would use the auto pen to order our armed forces to start a war in Europe. I mean, so was Putin. We came really close during those last days, September, October, November of last year. So, yeah, you're right. Trump is smart enough to realize that the equities are such that Russia has the bigger. You know, this should not be a revelation to anyone. 10 years ago, 2015, Obama said, look, with respect to Ukraine, we have core interests in the world. The Russians have core interests in the world. We have no core interests in Ukraine. The Russians do. Now, get out a map and look at it, okay? Now, the worst thing we can do for the Ukrainians is to give them the idea that they can prevail in a war against a much stronger Russia. So, don't give them any offensive arms, for God's sake. Restrain them. Who wants a war with a much stranger Russia? Now, okay, Biden was vice president. I guess maybe he was sleeping or something. But when he came in, Sullivan and Blinken said, we're the indispensable country. We're to do what we want. And so we lost 4 years that way. Mm-hmm. And the Russians did what they had to do, in their view, in Ukraine. Now we have a situation where the Ukrainians have taken it on the chin. As Mearsheimer warned 11 years ago, Ukraine has been destroyed, my God. And I just think about these fancy military officers that the United States has, General Milley and all those people. Did they not know basic? I mean, the stuff I learned as a platoon leader, I mean, the things you look at is weather, terrain, number of army, how they're equipped, and what we call them? Locks. L-O-C-K-S, not locks with the bagel. Okay, locks. Lines of communication and supply.
Mm-hmm.
sake, how could General Milley say, "Oh yeah, well, we're gonna give what is necessary for as long as it takes. Give me a break, huh?" He must. Well, if he didn't know, he's really stupider than he looks. All right. But those people just gave in because they were told, "Look, General Milley, don't tell anybody this, but this is to weaken Russia. That's what it's all about." Okay. And then Milley's successor, and General, what's his name, the guy who came in to be defense secretary, let the cat out of the bag. General Austin,
Mhm.
he says, "Well, yeah, actually, it really is to weaken Russia." So, do the Russians know that it was to weaken Russia? Well, I guess maybe they didn't read that what General Milley and what General Austin said. Of course, they read it. So now we have a realist, whatever else he is, in the United States as president. The Russians, I put myself in Putin's place, as I have in Soviet and Russian leaders for half a century now. And Putin said, "Look, we got 3 more years with this guy. He's a delusional narcissist." What does that mean? Well, I have to treat him that way. I have to kid gloves him. I say, "Oh yeah, sure, you should have got the Nobel Prize thing. Oh yeah, when we were in Beijing with the rest of the world, nobody said anything bad about you, Mr. Trump. Everything is really good." That's how you treat him. And then through your emissaries, particularly Ushakov and Dmitriev, both of whom were in those talks 10 days ago, you tell them, "Look, this is the lay of the land. This is what it really is. Let's pick up on the promises made in Anchorage on August 15th, which included, don't let Zelensky and those harebrained Europeans put the kibosh on this deal. Sabotage it. Don't let them do that." Now, Trump did precisely that in violation of his promise. In March and April and May, the Russians called him on that. And now he's come around, recognize reality, got a deal, okay? This is not all bad. You're going to save 50, 60,000 lives if this happens soon enough. Otherwise, you'll have to add them to the flower of Ukrainian youth that has now been killed, which is over 1 million young people.
The movie I was trying to remember is The Irishman, where De Niro plays Frank Sheehan, this Irish hitman, and he's talking to Joe Pesci, who plays Buffalino, and Hoffa's getting out of control, and the upper echelon of the mob decide they're going to put the hit on him. And so De Niro's talking to Pesci, and Pesci says to De Niro, "Hey, I talked to the upper guys, and you need to tell your friend it's what it is." And De Niro goes, "It's what it is? Yeah, it's what it is." Somebody needs to go to Zelensky and let him know it's what it is. And this latest discussion about elections in Ukraine, that to me is another signal to Zelensky. We're tired of you. We're done with you. And it's what it is. Because this discussion about thievery in his administration and all this corruption in his administration, to me, that was one signal. Now you got Donald Trump saying, I think it's time for elections in Ukraine. That to me is Donald Trump telling Zelensky, we've talked to the big guys and it's what it is. Your thoughts, Ray?
Well, I think you're right, Wilmer. And let me just add a couple of really important aspects to this whole thing. Corruption in Ukraine.
Oh, really?
I'm shocked.
Your winnings, sir. What, there's gambling in Casablanca? Your winnings, Captain.
So, we know now that these two inspector general type outfits were built by the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. And now finally, all of a sudden, they're doing their job. And everybody but Zelensky's uncle has been wrapped up in this thing. I mean, everybody, even Umerov, who's still negotiating with the US, is under some suspicion. The notion that Zelensky is like Caesar's wife, pure as the driven snow and doesn't know anything about it, is crazy. So what I'm saying here is it's the US and the UK behind all this. It's a warning to Zelensky. Look, the next thing we reveal could easily be you. Be aware, don't make waves, do what we tell you to do, or else. Okay, that's one thing. Now,
don't go away mad, just go away.
Just go away. The other thing is Zelensky has this benighted idea that the Europeans can help him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's because the Europeans told him, we can help you. And why did they tell him that? Because their political positions is so wound up in this enterprise with respect to Ukraine that if it goes south quickly, like within the next year or two, they're done. Elections are coming up in Europe, and they're out of there. They lose their power. They might end up in jail if the real corruption that's spread throughout Europe is revealed. So Zelensky has now he has to depend on the European. Now, the deal here, as I've said before, is really, really clever. Okay, as Trump has made clear, we're not going to give any more money or any more weapons to Ukraine. Okay, oh, that's big. Okay, what will we be able to do? Well, we'll sell weapons to the Europeans, and those weapons will be paid for by the Europeans, right? Okay, well one fly anywhere. We don't really have those weapons just now. We need them but a couple of years we'll have those weapons, and then maybe the Europeans will be able, maybe they'll be able to pay for them. Probably not. Okay, well, when the Europeans get these weapons and when they pay for them, then they'll give them to Ukraine, and sotto voce, there'll be no more soldiers in the Ukrainian army to use those weapons. So that's the syllogism, if you will. It's crazy. Okay. Now, one of the reasons it's crazy is going to come out for sure on December the 18th. Okay. That's when the Europeans meet. And the objective is to seize frozen Russian assets worth $150 to $200 billion. Mm-hmm. Now, that's what the EU, that's what Ursula von der Leyen wants to do. Yeah, that's what they're going to do, right? Except the Hungarians don't want to do this. The Slovakians don't want to do this. Even the French, and it's completely against international law. Most important, Belgium doesn't want to do this. Why? The funds are mostly in Belgium. So Ursula von der Leyen has done some very, very clever bypasses of European law, and she's got some scheme where they're not going to have a unanimous vote, and they're going to. So on the 18th of December, it will be clear whether she has succeeded in stealing these frozen Russian assets against the advice of all financial people, including financial people in the United States. Okay, if she succeeds in that, then, as Merz from Germany says, then we can go for 2 or 3 more years. Okay, and then we're safe in our place for 2 or 3 more years. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that has a prayer. Even if she succeeds in manipulating the system and gets some sort of non-consensus or non-unanimous approval, the Belgians aren't going to release those funds. So where does that leave us? Well, it means that the Europeans not only will have no weapons for a couple of years, they'll have no money to pay for the weapons, they'll have no money to fund what's going on in Ukraine, and so the Ukrainians run out of funds February or March of next year. They can't pay their own civil servants, much less their army. It's over. Okay. So most people don't know this because the Western press is,
Right.
holding us up. But that benighted idea of stealing the Russian frozen funds, which has so many negative consequences, is not going to fly in my view. And you can put that on a record. And if it doesn't fly, it's over. And so all Trump and Putin have to do is sort of wait for that. And maybe Zelensky will say, oh my God, they made all these promises. European leaders are very honorable people, and now they can't make good on these promises. Maybe I ought to either do what I'm told or take the next plane to the Italian Riviera and just have to choose between those two villas that I have there.
Did I read that von der Leyen was trying to frame this as a loan?
Yeah, it was going to be a loan, right? And the Russians are going to pay it back when they lose. I mean,
she was saying something along the lines of, we're going to take these Russian assets,
right?
We're going to lend them to Ukraine,
right?
And at the end of the day, Russia's still without its money.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Russians care about this. I mean, some people are saying, well, they can get along without $200 billion. And that's true. But the precedent here.
It's the principle of the thing. Because they're doing the same thing to Venezuela.
Yeah. And the objective, in other words, to persist for 2 more years. Russians don't want that. And I find it really interesting that it seems very clear the U.S. is against it as well. The U.S. still has some residual power, influence in Europe. I don't think it'll fly. I hope I'm right. If I'm not right, then we can see 2 or 3 more years of war in Ukraine.
That's a there's a piece on your website at raymcgovern.com. Will Zelensky be given the truth? Merz, Starmer, Macron in London gave Zelensky a come to Jesus moment. And that's pretty much what we've just been talking about. So you really see the meeting last week as
Monday, 2 days ago.
Okay. As his come to Jesus moment.
Well, you forgot the question mark.
Oh, okay.
Will they use this as a come to Jesus? By any rights or any rational or any honest method, they should. But apparently they didn't, okay? Because next thing you know, Zelensky, I'm not giving up any land and they're supporting me up to the hilt. It's delusional. They don't have any troops. I mean,
right.
I don't like Stalin, and I usually don't quote him, but when people say now the Pope is against what you're doing and Stalin said, well, how many divisions does the Pope have? How many divisions does Europe have?
Right.
Without the United States, Europe is nothing in terms of a strategic threat. And that's pretty much come to being with the divorce between the United States and NATO, which came to light in a very peculiar way with this national strategy, this national defense strategy, which was revealed just this week.
But before we get to that, let me ask one more question.
Sure.
Because that's the next one I want to get to.
Okay. Don't forget
that. Bradley, there's another piece on your website about Bradley taking the bullet for Hegseth.
Yeah.
I'd like for you to elaborate on that. And then we'll go to the national security strategy.
Well, let me say first that all this attention on those 2 survivors who are clinging on the boat or clinging on some wood, waving to whether the U.S. drone or some other platform, save us, for 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was murder, pure and simple.
Right.
But it should not disguise the fact that the initial tap, the first firing on this boat, was murder, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Unauthorized murder. So there's those 2 things. Now, the interesting thing is that
all 23 strikes have been murder. All 64 people dead.
Yeah, actually, it's up around 80 now. Yeah. So they're all
that
been
is murder.
Right. Now, Hexeth says, well, no, they're blah, blah, blah. But even Congress, sheepish and cowardly as it is, has been pursuing this. Now, your announcement at the beginning of this program gives me pause. Will they punt again? Well, there are people that will want to punt again. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the deal is this. The head of Southcom, Admiral Halsey, quit.
Mm-hmm.
He quit about a month and a half ago, as memory serves.
In September.
Yeah. Why did he quit? Well, he never said, but he's going to say on Friday. Okay. On Friday, he's officially retired. Okay. Now, I pretty much know why he quit. His JAG, his a lawyer told him that if you fulfill these illegal orders, you pay a price because you don't have to obey illegal orders, and these are illegal orders. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he had been having it out with I was going to say Rumsfeld with Hegseth, okay, for weeks. Okay. Finally, Hegg said, okay, you retire. I won't say anything, and you don't say anything. Well, couldn't say anything until Friday. He retires on Friday. Okay. Now, was he in command of these strikes? No. He's only, in quotes, the head of Southcom. There's another command that runs these things. It's the Special Operations Command. They have their own chain of command. They have their own methods of communication. They have, and they don't even have to tell Admiral Halsey what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that did this stuff. Okay. Now, what's Admiral Bradley? Well, he was a special ops guy forever. Okay, he never commanded any big units, and by virtue of his singular success in killing those 2 extra people, he was promoted to becoming chief of the entire SOCOM, Special Operations Command. Whoa, what a neat deal, huh? So the bottom line here is that there are 2 commands. This is artfully done, and very few people are permitted to know what the Special Operations Command is doing, not even the regular Army or the regular Air Force, and not especially the people in Congress, or probably not the president. Was the president read in on this? Well, he's not on the bigot list. Probably not. The bigot list means people are allowed to know really, really sensitive secrets, okay? So that's all real smelly background. Is it murder? Of course it's murder. Should people be held accountable? Hegseth, right down to Bradley? Of course they should be. If they're not, well, it's another black mark on what has happened to the application, enforcement of law in our country.
And what line of jeopardy does that put our troops in foreign space? Because what Hegseth is saying is all bets are off. No rules apply. It's all about the golden rule, he with the gold rules. So, okay. So
yeah, he said in the past, look, rules of engagement, that's
right.
for sissies. Sissies, you know. I mean, the guy is deranged, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was picked because he's a good person on Fox News, and he has a chin like Dick Tracy. Now, most of you don't know who Dick Tracy. Look it up, okay? Dick Tracy, okay? So he fits the bill. He prances around, and I think if there's anything left in the way of courage on the part of Admiral Halsey and other people who are willing to tell the truth about this stuff, willing to say, look, our obligation is the Constitution of the United States, not to the president, not to Hegseth, then we're in for a good outcome from this. But that's not been the case very often in the past. We'll just have to wait and see what Halsey says as soon as he retires after 37 years on Friday.
The national security strategy. I've read it a couple of times, and it still makes no sense. Other than, I mean, but then one has to wonder, was it even supposed to make sense? Because it's written from, in my opinion, not from a long-term worldview perspective, not from an consistent ideological objective perspective. It's written from a transactional perspective. Ray McGovern.
Well, you're right. It has Trump all over it, and I can see his speechwriters taking dictation and all that stuff. Now, you have to agree that it's a literary gem. In other words, it's well written. Doesn't make much sense, but it's well written in explicating Trump's view of the world. Now, the big thing for me is that who's the priority in terms of dangers for the United States in this national defense strategy? Oh my God, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not terrorism, it's not the Middle East. Oh, it's the Western Hemisphere. Huh? Wow. And so we need to take our troops and reapportion their duties to the Western Hemisphere, where we're what kind of threats do we have here?
It's Patagonia.
Patagonia, don't forget Patagonia, but Venezuela,
Right.
Drugs. How about drugs? Well, you know what? Well, nobody else has pointed this out, but we knew on September 5th that this new guidance was going to come out. And at that point, it was said that this fellow, Eldridge Colby, who is hawk against China, he had gotten religion, right? Come to a Jesus moment. No, we're going to focus on two things: the Western Hemisphere and the homeland. Now, think about that, okay? Now, the final guidance doesn't say anything about the homeland, but I think that Trump and his coterie think they're going to need troops for the homeland, or maybe by this November, maybe at any time, if those of us who seek justice first start protesting in a way that they don't like. This is very dangerous. In other words, it wouldn't appear in this, but there's no way you can make the Western Hemisphere the threat for the supreme threat. What he says about Europe is really, really so condescending, and so you guys are out of it. You know, it's amazing. So yeah, I think it reflects Trump's thoughts. He got good people to write it. It doesn't make consistent sense, but you could see that there's been a change. And if I have 1 more minute, let me just say this. I think this change is occasioned by the tectonic shift in power between the West and the East. Okay. I'm thinking of that exhibition in China, Victory over Japan, September 3rd. Most of the world's leaders were there. The demonstration of where the power now lies cannot have escaped Trump, okay?
Right.
And so he goes back and he said, now, oh my God, well, you told me we can't build enough ships to challenge China. Okay, forgot about that. Ukraine, well, yeah, okay, what are we going to do? Well, I know what we do. We'll show where we have some muscle in the Western Hemisphere, right? And we'll take on Venezuela. Why do I say that? Because I saw it happen before. Back in 1983, when I was on active duty, really, 83, 241 U.S. Marines were murdered by a bomb in the barracks in Beirut. Ronald Reagan was a smart enough guy to say, what the hell were those Marines doing there anyway? Get them out of there. And they did. But then they needed to show their mettle. And he asked Weinberger and the others, well, how can we show how powerful we are? And Weinberger says, we can invade invade Grenada, a little island off Venezuela, actually. And we can make believe that those leftist leaders there are threatening our medical students. We can do it. And they did it. Now, was there a threat from Grenada? Of course not. Did we need to show how strong we were? Yes, we did. And I see a repeat of that because the U.S. has to have some sort of evidence that we still are really powerful. And the only place that we're really powerful now is in the Western Hemisphere. And we're going to lose power if we let real people demonstrate and say, look, this is not the way we want our country to run. We need troops for our country as well. That's the menace here. Nobody's pointed that out. But look at the political rendition of what this plan was back on September 5th this year. And you'll see the difference. It disturbs me greatly.
Final question for you, Ray. One of the things that jumped out at me immediately when I looked at the table of contents, it started with strategy, no objective. So if you, so that the first thing that came to my mind was, well, this says if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I was going to use that quote. You have to kind of prescind from some of the idiocies of this thing and see what's left really means. And yeah, there's no objectives, but the strategy is clear. The big thing is that our objective is no longer to zap the Russians and to zap the Chinese and make sure that the Ukrainians prevail and that the Israelis prevail. Those are all secondary considerations now. And what people don't understand is that the Russians have been saying ever since Trump came in that their priority is to create a decent relationship with the United States. Everything else is secondary. Ukraine is secondary. If the U.S. wants to attack Iran like it did with Israel, that too is secondary, okay? Now it's playing out in these negotiations. So they're not dead on arrival. They're going, can they be sabotaged? Well, they can be sabotaged right here in Washington. Not so much in Europe anymore, I don't think, but never underestimate the power of that coalition of the willing or of the brain dead.
Ray McGovern, as always, man, thank you so much for your time. I always enjoy these conversations with you, and I learn so much, and I know my audience does as well. So thank you, Ray. Really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
You too, Ray. Folks, that's it for today. Working on my guest for tomorrow. What I want to talk about is he hasn't responded yet. What I want to talk about is, today, Karina Machado was given her Nobel Prize, and her daughter had to accept it because she got there late. So I want to talk about that to a great degree, not so much that in and of itself, but the narrative surrounding this is what I really want to touch on, because they're making her out to be, for example, she's hiding out in Venezuela. If she's hiding out in Venezuela, then how good of an authoritarian is Maduro if he can't find her? It's when you start to unpack this narrative. Oh, thank you, Ramplesense. I appreciate that. When you start to unpack this narrative, the language just doesn't make sense. So that's what I want to focus on tomorrow. Still working on trying to nail my guest down for that. So with that to say, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Thank you, Ray McGovern. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. And please subscribe. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, history, and culture converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, you heard she was hiding in the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. Oh, that may very well be. One more. I'm sorry. Before I go, one point. Somebody asked on Monday. I made the point that Donald Trump was transactional. And the question was posted in the chat, and I didn't see it until after Larry Hooks Jr. Larry Hooks Jr. in the chat on Monday asked, what did I mean by transactional? And Larry, I did not see your question until the show ended. So let me answer that question. What I mean when I say that Donald Trump is a transactional individual, it means he has no broad, encompassing worldview. He has no controlling ideology that is used as the gauge to assess right or wrong, good or evil, yes or no. That he looks at every circumstance as a transaction, and he gauges the success or the value of the transaction based on what does it mean for him. So that's why you can very easily hear and see incredible inconsistencies in his so-called policies, in his statements, because he has no problem saying on Monday that we're backing Zelensky, and then on Tuesday saying we're getting out of Ukraine. If you're a transactional individual, those inconsistencies mean nothing to you, because all you're concerned about is immediacy. All you're concerned about is the moment. There was a reporter that asked him, I'm trying to remember what the question was. Golly, they were in the cabinet meeting, and oh damn, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, she asked a question, Mr. President, you said this on Monday. And he said, no, I didn't. And we had very clearly seen the tape of him doing so. So anyway, that's what I mean when I say that he's a transactional individual. With that being said, Larry, I hope that answers the question. And I apologize for not seeing the question when you posted it. With that being said, folks, I want you all to, I thank you all so much for joining me today. And I want you all to have a blessed remainder of your day. And we will see you tomorrow. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.